It all began on a bright and joyful morning, the kind of day every parent dreams of. The sun was warm, the flowers bloomed with life, and my heart was overflowing with pride and happiness. My son was getting married. Watching him stand there, confident and smiling, next to the woman he loved, felt like the world had aligned perfectly. Every mother waits for that moment when her child finally begins a new chapter, and I thought this was mine. The guests laughed, the music played softly in the background, and everything seemed just perfect. But perfection, as I would later learn, can be an illusion. At the wedding, there was this young photographer, polite, quiet, and deeply focused on his work. I remember how he moved through the crowd with purpose, capturing moments no one else seemed to notice. The way he clicked the camera felt almost emotional, as though he could see beyond the smiles and into the truth hiding behind them. I didn't think much of it then. After all, it was just a wedding, and he was just doing his job. 6 months later, that ordinary man would call me and say words that would shatter my peace. "Ma'am, I need to show you something." But let's go back to that day. The beginning. The atmosphere was full of laughter and love. Friends toasted, glasses clinked, and the air carried the scent of roses and new beginnings. I remember holding my son's hand tightly before he walked down the aisle, whispering, "Make her happy. That's all a mother ever asks." He smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "I will, Mom." In that moment, I believed him completely. I believed in the promises, in the vows, in the beauty of forever. I didn't know that somewhere, hidden behind the camera's lens, a silent truth was being recorded, one that would eventually unravel everything I thought I knew about my family, my son, and the woman he chose to marry. That was the day my world looked perfect, until the pictures spoke. The wedding day was nothing short of magical. The venue glowed in golden sunlight, draped with ivory ribbons and soft roses that perfumed the air. Guests arrived dressed in elegance, their laughter echoing like music through the garden. The air buzzed with joy, and for a mother, there was no greater sight than watching her son stand tall, ready to begin a new chapter of his life. I remember sitting there, my heart swelling with pride, my eyes misty with emotion. Every little detail, from the delicate lace on the bride's gown to the soft melody of the violin, felt like a dream come true. I can still see my son's face so vividly. He looked nervous but happy, the kind of happiness that makes a mother's heart melt. He had grown into a fine man, respectful, kind, and full of life. When he turned to see his bride walking down the aisle, a look of awe spread across his face. Everyone noticed it, that deep, unspoken love that only two people who believe in forever can share. The bride smiled sweetly, her eyes locked on his, and the crowd sighed in admiration. It was beautiful, heartbreakingly beautiful. I remember glancing at the photographer, a quiet young man with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. He wasn't loud or intrusive like most photographers I'd met. He moved silently between guests, almost invisible. But his camera never stopped clicking. He seemed to notice moments others missed. The trembling of my hands as I clutched a tissue, the nervous laughter between the couple, the slight tension in the groom's shoulders that only a mother would recognize. I brushed it off as nerves. Every wedding has its share of emotions, I told myself. As the vows were exchanged, the garden fell silent. The bride's voice quivered with emotion, and my son promised to love her, in every season of life. Those words echoed inside me. I believed them. I wanted to believe them more than anything. The photographer captured that exact moment. The teardrop that fell down my cheek, the proud smile on my son's face, the flash of light that sealed it all in a single frame. Later, during the reception, laughter and music filled the room. Everyone danced, clinked glasses, and celebrated love. The photographer stayed quietly at the edge of the crowd, observing, recording, freezing time. I noticed him once more. His eyes focused, almost troubled, as if he saw something the rest of us didn't. I didn't know then that his camera had captured more than memories. It had captured the beginning of a truth that would one day break my heart. As the celebration continued, I began noticing something unusual about the photographer. At first, it was subtle, barely enough to raise suspicion. He wasn't mingling much with the guests or laughing along like most photographers do when they capture candid moments. Instead, he seemed distant, focused, almost too serious for a wedding so full of joy. His eyes didn't just look through the lens, they studied people, watched interactions, and lingered longer than expected on certain faces. He often aimed his camera not at the newlyweds smiling for pictures, but at quiet corners of the room. The tables where hushed conversations took place, or moments when expressions shifted from joy to discomfort. Once, I caught him lowering his camera and staring directly at the bride. Not with admiration, but with what I can only describe as concern. His brows furrowed, his lips pressed into a thin line. It was as though he'd seen something he wasn't supposed to. During dinner, while everyone toasted the couple, I noticed him again. He wasn't photographing the speeches or the laughter. Instead, he zoomed in on the bride's phone, resting slightly hidden under the table, glowing faintly as messages popped up. My heart told me I was overthinking it, that he was just doing his job creatively, capturing every detail. But there was something in his expression, a flicker of unease, that made me wonder. Later, when he approached the couple for their final portraits, he hesitated before snapping the first shot. I saw him whisper something softly to the groom, who brushed it off with a polite nod. The photographer sighed, adjusted his camera, and continued, though his smile never reached his eyes. By the end of the night, when everyone danced under fairy lights, I noticed him standing at a distance again, reviewing his photos with a conflicted look. For a split second, his face turned pale. Then he quickly pocketed his camera, avoiding eye contact as he left the hall early. I remember thinking it was strange. But little did I know that those photographs, the ones he couldn't bring himself to delete, would one day change everything I believed about that perfect wedding day. 6 months had passed since the wedding, 6 quiet, peaceful months filled with the usual rhythm of life. My son and his new wife had settled into their home, and from the outside, everything seemed perfect. They shared photos on social media, celebrated birthdays, and visited on weekends. I believed they were happy. I had finally started to relax, thinking that the joy of that day had carried on into their marriage. But one evening, just as I was preparing dinner, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. When I answered, a hesitant voice greeted me. "Mom, I'm sorry to call you like this," the man said softly. "This is the photographer from your son's wedding. I know it's been months, but there's something I need to show you." My heart froze for a moment. His tone wasn't casual. It was heavy, careful, the kind of voice people use when they're afraid of what their words might do. I asked if everything was all right, but he paused before answering. "It's about your daughter-in-law. Something I saw that day, something I captured by accident." I felt a chill crawl down my spine. My first thought was disbelief. What could possibly be so important after all this time? Maybe he found a few extra photos, or wanted to share a special memory. But something in his voice told me this wasn't about a simple picture. He asked if we could meet in person, saying it wasn't something he could explain over the phone. His exact words still echo in my mind. "You deserve to know the truth. I've been debating for months whether to tell you, but my conscience won't let me stay silent." I remember sitting at the kitchen table long after the call ended, the food forgotten, my hands trembling. 1,000 thoughts flooded my mind. Was someone hurt? Was there some hidden problem in the marriage? Or had he discovered something far worse? That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying his words, trying to piece together what could have happened at that wedding that I, a mother standing so close, had somehow missed. The next morning, he sent me a message with a location. A quiet cafe near the edge of town. I didn't tell my son. I didn't tell anyone. All I knew was that something was waiting for me. Something buried in those photographs, something that would unravel the truth behind that perfect day. When I arrived at the small cafe the next morning, my heart felt like it was trapped in my throat. The photographer was already there, sitting in the corner, his camera bag beside him. He looked nervous, almost as if he regretted calling me. His hands trembled slightly as he stirred his coffee, and when he saw me approach, he stood up immediately. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly, his eyes darting toward the bag on the seat next to him. I could tell this wasn't going to be an ordinary conversation. We exchanged polite greetings, but the air between us was heavy. Finally, he took a deep breath and said, "Mom, I didn't want to get involved, but I think you need to see this." He opened his laptop and pulled up a folder titled Wedding, Final Edits. My pulse quickened. One by one, the photos appeared. Smiling faces, laughter, dancing. Everything looked normal at first. But then, his cursor hovered over one specific image. "This," he said, clicking twice, "is where everything changed for me." The picture was taken during the reception. My son stood at the edge of the dance floor, laughing with some friends. In the background, barely noticeable unless you looked closely, was my daughter-in-law. She wasn't dancing, she wasn't smiling. Instead, she was standing with a man I didn't recognize. A man who wasn't part of our family, leaning in close to her, whispering something into her ear. Her expression wasn't one of discomfort or surprise, it was familiarity. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, their faces inches apart. My chest tightened. I wanted to believe it was nothing. A trick of the light, a misunderstood moment. But then he clicked on another photo. This one captured what happened seconds later, the same man slipping a folded note into her hand. She quickly tucked it under her bouquet, glancing around as if afraid someone might notice. My world began to spin. "There's more," the photographer said softly. He showed me a short clip he had accidentally recorded while adjusting his camera settings. A brief video where their voices could faintly be heard. The words were quiet, but clear enough to break me completely. "I'll see you tonight, after it's all over." I sat frozen, staring at the screen, unable to breathe. Every image I had of that perfect day shattered in an instant. The photographer lowered his gaze and whispered, "I didn't know whether to tell you, but I couldn't live with it on my conscience." At that moment, I realized the truth. The photos hadn't just captured a wedding, they had captured betrayal hiding behind smiles. I sat there in the cafe long after the last image faded from the screen, my hands trembling so violently I could barely hold the cup in front of me. The world around me blurred into silence. The faint chatter, the smell of coffee, the sound of spoons clinking against mugs. All of it disappeared beneath the crushing weight of what I had just seen. My chest felt heavy, my throat burned, and I couldn't stop the tears from falling. I kept whispering to myself, "No, this can't be true. Not her. Not my son's wife." Every image replayed in my mind like a cruel movie I couldn't pause. I thought of my son. How happy he looked, how he believed he had found the love of his life. The memory of him saying, "Mom, she's everything I ever wanted," echoed painfully in my head. How could I face him knowing the truth I now carried? How could I destroy the dream he had built, the one he still believed in? My heart ached not only for him, but for the innocence that had been lost. The photographer sat quietly across from me, guilt written all over his face. "I'm sorry," he said again, almost in a whisper. "I didn't want to hurt you, but I couldn't hide it anymore." I nodded faintly, unable to speak. My voice was trapped behind the lump in my throat. I managed to ask, "Are you sure it's not just a misunderstanding?" He hesitated, then shook his head slowly. "I wish it were." That broke me. I stood up and walked out of the cafe, barely aware of my surroundings. The air outside hit me cold and sharp. I leaned against a wall, clutching my chest as sobs escaped uncontrollably. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and helpless. For months I had cherished those wedding photos, proudly showing them to friends, believing they symbolized love and unity. Now they were just reminders of a lie. As I cried, a thought cut through the pain. My son deserved the truth. But how do you tell your child that the person he loves most may be deceiving him? The idea tore me apart. I wanted to protect him from heartbreak. Yet I couldn't protect him from the truth forever. That day, standing on the sidewalk with tears running down my face, I realized that sometimes love means being the one to break someone's heart, because it's the only way to save them. That evening, I drove to my son's house, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. Every turn of the wheel felt heavier, as though the car itself resisted taking me to where I needed to go. My mind replayed the photos again and again, each image slicing deeper into my chest. I wanted to believe there was some logical explanation. Maybe the man in the photos was a friend. Maybe the note meant nothing. But deep down, I knew the truth was never that simple. The pain of knowing weighed more than the uncertainty ever did. When I arrived, the house looked peaceful, the warm glow of lights flickering through the windows. My son opened the door with his usual smile. "Mom, what a surprise," he said, wrapping me in a hug. His embrace, so full of trust and affection, nearly broke me. I held him tighter than usual, struggling to keep my tears from falling. He noticed something was off almost immediately. "Mom, what's wrong?" he asked, concern spreading across his face. I looked past him and saw her, my daughter-in-law, setting the dinner table. She smiled politely, the same smile that had once made me believe she truly cared for my son. But now, it looked different. I saw through it. The careful performance, the practiced sweetness. My stomach twisted. I sat down, trying to steady my breathing, and said softly, "We need to talk. All of us." Her smile faltered for just a second, just long enough to confirm my fears. My son glanced between us, confused. "Is everything okay?" he asked. My voice trembled as I spoke. "I met the photographer today. He showed me some photos from the wedding, ones that weren't in the album." The color drained from her face. My son looked puzzled, then alarmed. "What photos?" he asked, turning to her. She stuttered, reaching for words that never came. The silence that followed was unbearable. I could see the truth flickering in her eyes: guilt, fear, shame, and then denial. She tried to laugh it off, but her voice cracked. My son turned pale, realizing something was terribly wrong. The argument that followed was raw, painful, and full of disbelief. My son demanded answers, but she could barely speak. When she finally confessed, his knees buckled. Watching him break was the hardest thing I'd ever endured. But as tears filled his eyes, he turned to me and whispered, "Thank you for telling me." That was the moment I realized. The truth hurts, but silence destroys. In the days that followed, the house that was once filled with laughter grew quiet. My son was broken, yet strangely calm. The kind of calm that comes when the heart has cried all it can. I stayed by his side, cooking his meals, listening to his silence, and reminding him that pain, no matter how deep, eventually softens into strength. There were moments I wanted to take away his hurt, to erase what he saw and return him to the happiness he once had. But I couldn't. Sometimes, love means simply standing beside someone as they face their truth. One evening, he looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Mom, I think I needed to know. I just didn't want to learn this way." His words carried both grief and gratitude. It was then I realized something powerful. The truth, no matter how painful, is still a gift. It frees us from living inside a lie. I often think back to that wedding day. The music, the laughter, the perfect pictures that now mean something entirely different. I no longer see that day as a moment of betrayal, but as the beginning of a transformation. My son found the strength to let go, to start over, and to choose peace over bitterness. And I learned something too, that a mother's instinct, though often quiet, is rarely wrong. And that love isn't about protecting someone from pain, but guiding them through it. The photographer later told me that he hadn't been able to sleep for months, unsure if revealing the truth was the right thing to do. I told him it was, because truth, even when it breaks hearts, also heals them. Now, when I look at those old photos, I no longer see betrayal. I see lessons. I see resilience. And I see a mother and son who faced the darkest truth and still found light on the other side.